Tears in Heaven, written by Lord Tyder. It was considered the worst tragedy in galactic history. It was a genocide of enormous proportions, and it was all an accident. The Sanu were considered the most empathic race in the galaxy, friends to all and enemies to none. Even the greatest conflicts and wars, they were considered untouchable. Would anyone dare to attack them, they were met with open arms, and they would apologize afterwards for being so rash. Trade flourished with the Sanu. You could always get a fair deal at a fair price. If there were any diplomatic problems between species, the Sanu, more than any other species, was chosen to arbitrate. Every cradle planet or star system with a center of power had Sanu embassies, consulates, and a large presence of Sanu civilians, even on the most warmongering planets around. The Sanu seemed almost godlike, but it was just a quirk of their nature. Their evolution developed the ability to sense other people's emotions and react to their emotional state. The Sanu did not hide this evolutionary advantage, so that no one could accuse them of manipulation, at least not in a direct way. The Sanu, being friends to all, were the prime candidates to handle first contact missions, a task that required delicacy. A task that Sanu happily accepted. When the Central Galaxy Trade Organization monitored the successful rate of first contact missions, the Sanu managed to have a 99.9% success rate. The few times that they were unsuccessful were when they encountered species with no emotions at all, and the task was handed over to the few species that were more based on logic than emotion. The Sanu's handling of emotions was not just an advantage in establishing new communications, but it was also vital to their society. Every San, single person, was connected with a telepathic field to every other member of the species. This field extended around their own planet, but it was also transmitted with space relays to every Sanu ship. This way, every time the Sanu read the emotions of a new species, it got filtered down to every member in the entire galaxy. The experience would have biological reactions, mainly endorphins, but also stress hormones like cortisol. The Great Filter would make it all manageable. It allowed them to respond to any outburst with understanding and a way to quell any hostility, confusion, or panic. The Great Filter was their greatest asset and strength, and it would be their downfall. First contact. The sign that kicked off everything was the telltale signature of an FTL jump. The previously considered primitive species managed to take the first steps into the galactic stage, going faster than the speed of light. But with such an endeavor, it'll garner a lot of attention. Some attention would be unwanted, some would be peaceful, and some would be catastrophic. Usually, such a catastrophe would occur to the newcomer. But this time, the Sanu, once again, were chosen to represent the Central Galaxy Trade Organization to welcome the new species into the community. It was standard procedure at this point. The flagship of the Sanu, which in their own language was called Friendship 1, was the ideal vessel, although people would find the name tacky, to locate the FTL jump and make first contact with the species that created it. Multiple planets waited in anticipation for the news. Media was buzzing and speculating how the new species would look like. Was it a peaceful species, a warlike species? Did they have a unified government, or was their world still divided into multiple territories? Have they colonized their own system yet? The commerce planets were already making draft proposals for trade, although most were eyeing mining rights, which traditionally seemed to be the most lucrative thing for new species initially. Rumors that the species lived in a high-gravity world, lush with jungles, sprawling cities, and intense weather soon spread when the first long-distance scans came in. The planet was the third major one in the star system, which was already remarkable for having at least 8 planets. Some of them gas giants, an asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planet, and an ice belt surrounding the star system. After a day of waiting, standard galactic day, the Friendship 1 finally got into orbit of the 3rd planet from the star. Hell broke loose. Reports were chaotic, confusing, and filled with panic. Across the galaxy, embassies reported that all Sanu on their planet screamed intensely. and then dropped, lifeless. At every Sanu settlement, in every city with significant Sanu population, the same thing occurred. Screams, followed by death. And the Sanu home star system itself became silent. Even the most warlike planets, pirate fleets, logic-driven worlds, and trade hubs were shocked by the sheer volume of death. Towns and cities were filled with corpses of Sanu, overwhelmed and incapable of processing that amount. It took months before a preliminary tally was made of the dead. 203 billion. There was a great search to see if any Sanu survived. 428 individuals were found, but all were mentally unstable. Half of them took their own lives. The remaining survivors were all catatonic. A great mourning began. Confusion was replaced with anger and fear. Was it a new weapon that killed the most peaceful and welcoming species ever to have been known? Voices rose up to swear revenge. The spark ignited the flames of war from all corners. Worlds that had been at peace for centuries started gathering a mighty fleet. What has this new species done? After one cycle, a great armada comprising billions of warships descended upon the Sol Star system. All at the ready, cautiously. A species that wipes out an entire species must have great defenses. Yet, when entering the system, sensors picked up almost nothing. No high-old weaponry, no system-wide defense net, no interplanetary superhighway. So normal for any species to have, absent. What was picked up was a lot of chatter from the third planet, buzzing with primitive radio waves. One frequency stood out, because it was more powerful and consisted of a looped message. Universal translators worked diligently, actual people studying language, not the device used for communications, to decipher the message. It was a call for help. For anyone out there, this is call for aid. On the 19th of Unknown, in the year 2311, we, humans of the planet Earth, made contact with a spaceship of the otherworldly origin. It landed at unknown coordinates in Belgium. When it landed, what we presumed was a door opened and 3 individuals moved out of the ship. A delegation of politicians was there to greet them. Something went terribly wrong. The individuals looked at the politicians, grabbed their own, what we presumed were heads, screamed loudly, and then collapsed. We have no medical knowledge of their physiology and were helpless in reviving them. Their bodies have been placed in a biological cooling facility, isolated from the environment, and their ship has been placed in a military facility. We dare not investigate. We are open to any species. We mean no harm. If this call is heard, and you somehow understand what we are saying, land a ship at unknown coordinates, in the country of the United States of America. It has historically been a top-secret area. However, if you wish to land there, we will open it up to the world. We welcome you, and we repeat, we mean you no harm. The message kept repeating until the coordinates were confirmed. The Tarduk volunteered to send a ship to land. Seeing they managed to integrate the language of this new species into their translator device. Normally, the Tarduk was one of the last species to officiate contact with any new species. But since their relationship with the Sanu was so strong, they offered themselves. And so, it was decided. One small vessel armed to the teeth and armored with the thickest shields, both in energy and physical materials, was sent. External speakers were placed and sound sensors installed, so that any communications would be done from within the ship. When the ship finally landed at the coordinates, silence was observed. For 3 rotations of the planet, no one dared to make a move. But since the rest of the Tarduk Armada was not experiencing any obliteration, what was happening was not killing them. And then the grief-filled message from the Tarduk ship returned. They found the reason for what happened. The Great Filter was designed to take brainwaves that were received by the Sanu and literally filter it, to tone down the emotions the Sanu experienced when encountering a new species. They learned that some species have such strong emotions, it would overwhelm them. The Tarduk helped design it together with the Sanu, being very technologically advanced and considered a very emotional species. The filter was a dampened retransmission signal that could be spread via repeaters to the entire Sanu race, and then looped back. Instead of one member having to deal with the emotions of a new species, the entire Sanu society got a little dose so that the impact was manageable and safe. Until they met humanity, when the Sanu stepped out of their ship, they were greeted with an emotional bombardment they had never experienced before. The Tarduk estimated it was on a magnitude larger than any other species could produce. But that was not even the worst of it. A single San would personally have been able to withstand it, albeit with a light headache, maybe some nausea. But the Great Filter was never calibrated to have this much brainwave activity hitting the system. Instead of dampening the brainwaves, it started enhancing and severely increasing the signal. It was then transmitted via every amplifier installed in the Central Galaxy Trade Organization, so every Sanu got a debilitating amount of the signal. It got worse. The signal got looped, amplified, and retransmitted and looped again. Almost every member got a lethal feedback loop of emotion. Excitement, joy, hate, anxiety, sorrow, depression, love, embarrassment, hopelessness, grief, ecstasy. All emotions were experienced to a mind-boggling degree, and Sanu biology could not handle it. Their brains experienced hemorrhaging, aneurysms, and neural degradation. Their deaths were not short, and their deaths were not painless. 5 minutes of torture followed by the end. The very few survivors most likely were just out of range to get the full brunt of it, but even they were paralyzed by what happened with their people. The ones who committed suicide did so out of sheer horror and grief. Aftermath. 150 cycles passed, and humanity started to spread through the galaxy. Of course, people feared them. Of course, every human was looked at with weary eyes. And of course, conflict followed. However, the largest part of the Central Galaxy Trade Organization did not blame humanity. Surprisingly, the Tarduk became their most staunchest of allies. It came with some surprise that humanity requested to colonize the former Sanu homeworld, not out of a desire to actually occupy and extract resources, but to, in their words, make a monument planet, so that the tragedy of Sanu genocide would always be remembered. And after getting permission from the few descendants of Sanu, they soon landed on the planet, and they transformed the planet into the biggest mausoleum in the galaxy. It was after a few cycles that a pilgrimage started from across the galaxy. The largest group of pilgrims were humans themselves, followed by the biggest former allies of the Sanu. Everyone gave their respects on the planet. Anyone traveling to the planet would have been greeted with a message. You hereby enter the Sanu system, home of the Sanu. None of them live here anymore. The great tragedy that befell them happened across the galaxy. Mind that you are landing on a gravesite, and all who land here will be required to be solemn and respectful to the dead. Those who desecrate this place because of their behavior will be asked to leave. If you want to pay respect, please land at the provided coordinates. For other business, please contact the Galactic Sanu Memorial Burial Site and state your business. No commercials or industrial business will be permitted on this planet, except for maintenance reasons. But that message, if you landed near the memorial site, you would disembark at the biggest graveyard ever seen. Information pillars spread across the area provided information on the entire Sanu race, with testimonies from allies, and the last recordings of the survivors and subsequent few descendants. The area contained graves of over 220 million Sanu. Humans across the galaxy are determined to get all the remains back to the Sanu system, for as long as it takes. As a species, the few Sanu survivors were not enough to rekindle the population. Many were close relatives, and the few descendants were too little of consequence. Genetically, the Sanu were extinct. The last Sanu already arranged that after their deaths, they would be placed here. Throughout the graveyard, speakers softly played mournful music. One song stood out. It was from an ancient bard from humanity's homeworld. It tells a tale of loss of the son of the bard, who, at a very young age, died in a tragic accident. The bard wonders after he passes away himself if he will ever meet his son in the afterlife, in a paradise, and if so, if his son would recognize him, and if he would even be allowed to see him again after what happened. Would you know my name if I saw you in heaven? End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.